I'm trying to get my lighting right. The lighting is just not making me happy. But we'll do the podcast anyway. Cue the music. Hey, this was something that was inspired while I was doing post-production on the last podcast. I was watching myself and, I'm sitting here wearing my springy shirt and wondering, is that really appropriate in April? Maybe, maybe not. But I saw this and I was like, what do you have? I don't remember putting this on, weirdly, but I do have a St. Margaret. Is a St. Margaret pendant, and that might seem a little bizarre, except that you don't know what I know about St. Margaret, which is that I am actually a descendant of St. Margaret. And St. Margaret is she's the patron saint of a lot of cool stuff like romantic partnerships, marriages, stuff like that. So I wear that because, not only because she's my ancestor, but because she has a really cool backstory. If you don't know her backstory, go look it up. St. Margaret of Scotland, because I am partly Scottish, mostly English, but partly Scottish. So I'm going to, in that vein, I thought I would do a little podcast where I go into my DNA, the little genealogical research that I've done on myself, because I find this stuff fascinating. As you can probably imagine, I think everybody should do this, no matter what part of the world you're from. This is something that we have so many fascinating resources now, not just the DNA resources, but just genealogical research, which sites like Ancestry.com have compiled, or really the Latter-day Saints. And I want to use that term. I don't want to just They don't like the term Mormon. I want to use Latter-day Saints. The Latter-day Saints have compiled incredible resources. They have a website that you can access that where there's just lots and lots of records. Ancestry.com does too. I don't want to sell them short, and there are other websites that do that as well. But I have been particularly fascinated, not just by my famous ancestors. Like I have a relative who is in Francis Drake's family, and I have one of on my paternal side, I'm descended from Susanna Martin, who was one of the people who were executed in Salem during the witch trials. And it's really kind of ironic because I didn't learn that fact until after I visited Boston multiple times and visited Salem, and I didn't learn that Susanna Martin was my ancestor until after the last visit. So I never visit. She has a grave there, and I never visited that grave. I plan to do so next time I'm up in that area. But what I'm particularly fascinated by are the two strains of DNA that are really the ones that are that reach furthest back, because most of our DNA gets so mixed up. Like, for example, I trace my genealogy back to, let me see if I can find this person, so I want to get her name right. I'm currently on my ancestry tree on Ancestry.com, and I want to find. I have an ancestor who was Wampanoag, which was something that was always like a family story. Oh man, I can't find it. But when I did my DNA test, it said it didn't have any Native American. It didn't have any Native American ancestry, which could make sense because they only test certain markers, and as far back as this is, those markers can really get diluted, and therefore I may not have any of the this person's DNA prominently in my DNA at this point. It's very, very likely that it's been sort of diluted out to the point where I can't find her. I know she's in here, and yet, okay, let me see. There's Samuel Drake. And no, it's not in that line. That's the Drake line. But my point is that a lot of these background, these ancestors, there's so many of them. At a certain point, you're like in the thousands of people, and so their DNA gets so diluted that you could have someone back there that is a member of this or that ethnicity, but at the same time, it doesn't show up in your DNA test precisely because these things get diluted so badly that they just don't show up anymore. Okay, I found a little thing here. Samuel Weldon, John Weldon. Okay. Ogina Cataquina. She's way up there. I don't know what is she. She was born in Massachusetts, of course, and she is Wampanoag, which is an Algonquian people that lived at that time, and she was married to a man named Gabriel Weldon. They had a son named John Weldon, who had a son named Samuel Weldon, who had a son named Benjamin Weldon, who had a daughter named Mary Weldon, who had a son named Samuel Drake by John Drake. Okay, so those two things sort of come together in my background. But as I said, the DNA test at Ancestry.com, and I'm planning to do another one at 23andMe, did not find any Native American DNA. That doesn't mean there's not any in there. It just means that their test didn't get those markers. However, a dentist has told me, and this is one of those things like someone told me, but really, I have a peculiar dental phenomenon in my front two teeth. It's called, I think it's called synodonty or sundodonty. There's two forms, but basically there's a shovel-shaped back to these two front teeth, which is only found in East Asian and Native American people. And this doctor, who is clearly a huge nerd, he wasn't just fixing people's teeth, he was fascinated by teeth. And he said, do you have a Native American or East Asian ancestry? And I was like, why did you ask that? I was like, no. He says, because you have a certain thing about the back of your front teeth that is only from those groups. And I kind of took it in stride. Then I went and did some research, and I'm feeling the back of my teeth now because I can feel it. It's really fascinating how these little things manifest themselves. These little ethnic markers manifest themselves in our bodies, and it ties you to people in such bizarre and meaningful ways. But I did some research, and he was spot on about that. The particular phenotypical shape of my front teeth is only from East Asians and Native Americans. So there has to be, I'm almost certain from the genealogy that I've done that has come from that particular woman, and it's just been passed down, and it didn't get caught up in the markers that Ancestry.com does. Although they are constantly updating their data files, and that may, they update their ethnicity estimates a lot, very often. I think I've gotten 2 updates, and funnily enough, every time I get updated, I get more and more English. I'm going to have to change. I'm going to have to change my name to Nigel, like I joked about a couple of podcasts ago. I'm going to have to change my name to Nigel. If I get any more British, my name will be Nigel Leith. Although Leith is Scottish and Arabic. So anyway, but beyond all those DNA markers, there are 2 DNA markers that you get from your mother and your father and their mothers and their fathers and down the line that are essentially cloned from generation to generation. which that's fascinating, which means like whoever your maternal line ancestor in the 1500s, the 1100s, or whoever your paternal line ancestor, if you're a male, not if you're a female, it's Y DNA, all the way back, you essentially have the exact same genes in the Y DNA from your paternal line or in the mitochondrial DNA from your female line. And I've traced that mitochondrial DNA back to a lady named Tabitha Keynes, or Tabitha McKee, who was born 1810. Very little information about her, except that she initially had married a guy. What was that guy's name? His name was Goines, I think. I'm looking up her profile right now. She married a guy named Goines first. That was not my ancestor. But she married a guy named Goines, Dudley Goyne, who was in records, and I'm only using this word because that's the word they use in the records. He was a mulatto, which means he was mixed race. And then something happened to him. He died or something, and she married a guy named John Farmer, who was my actual ancestor. And I've been trying to find Tabitha Keynes or Tabitha McKee's mother for the longest time. I know her father was a man named Elijah William McKee, who may have fought in the Revolutionary War. It's unsure. There were multiple people named Elijah McKee in the or what would be the United States at that time. But for some reason, her mother's name, other than the initial J, is not recorded, and I don't know why, which is unfortunate, because I would really like to know who her mother was, because that's where the mitochondrial DNA comes from. Now, on my father's side, which is Turley, which may surprise you, I have actually been able to track back the paternal line to 1500. A man named Francis Turley, who was born in, of course, England, about the year 1500. He was born in Staffordshire, and a lot of the family, a lot of the males in that particular line were from Staffordshire, England. So that to me, that to know that my Y DNA was walking around in a human being, pretty much the same, unless some mutations have taken place since 1500, which that might be likely. But I know that a huge part of my DNA makeup, the stuff that makes me a dude, the stuff that affects a lot of my behavior and my feelings and my instincts and how I look, was walking around in a person from the 1500s in Staffordshire, England, and then his son and his son and his son, and they spent some time in northern England for a while. A guy named John Turley, who was born in 1628, moved there, and then he had a son, and then he had a grandson who was also named John Turley. The Johns are big in my family, even though this was a long time ago. And he married an Irish lady named Anna Craw, and it just being able to track this stuff and seeing all these guys, down to James Cabell Turley, another John Turley, a guy named Berryman Turley, a guy named John Jackson Andrew Turley, although I'm not a big fan of Andrew Jackson, but you can tell this is in the mid 1800s, so Andrew Jackson was like a big hero to some people at that time. So they gave their son the middle name based on the guy who had been president. So when I saw this thing from St. Margaret, who and I said, she's my ancestor, I should talk about that, and to encourage people to look into their own ancestry. It doesn't matter, if you're a European American, or if you're of European descent, African descent, Asian descent, anywhere, just look into this stuff is fascinating. I mean, sometimes the records aren't really good. I have some lines in here, especially when you start to go back to like 5th, 6th, 7th generation back, you start to bump into people who there's no record of who their parents were. But I've been very lucky as far as my paternal line, less lucky as far as my maternal line. But even outside those lines, I've found people who were mayors of London. Eventually everybody goes back to royalty. I mean, it's just inevitable. There are so many people. You get back, and every generation multiplies by a factor of two. So eventually everybody's going to go back to people about whom there are, a lot of records, a lot of official records. And they're in your background. There are saints in your background. There are, nobles in your background. There are people from around the world in your background. And I'm finding out about this, and you should go find out about this, because it's just fascinating, and it really gives you a sense of all the events in history that have come together to create the person that you are. And it lets you it sort of imbues you with a sense of having a sort of mysterious purpose. Like, why am I here? Well, all these people did things. They lived. You can find records about them enlisting in wars, about the positions that they held. Sometimes even about, I have one ancestor, and I can't remember what his name was, but I have one ancestor who traveled across the sea with his father, and his father died on a ship named the Speedwell. It's incredible that I know that. And you can find out things like this about yourself, about, whether your ancestors came from this or that part of whatever continent, and your DNA can help, nail that down as well. And so I encourage people. There are shows. If you are on Amazon Prime, and I'm sure there are other places, there are so many shows about, where celebrities. I know that PBS did one, and there are some other shows out there where celebrities enlist genealogists to look up their backgrounds, and they find fascinating things about the people in their backgrounds. And the fascinating thing is, they often find that their ancestors were doing a lot of the same things they're doing. If they're an actor, they find out that they have a great grandfather who was an actor. If they're in music, they find out that they have a great grandmother who was a singer. And so you start to say, oh wow, this stuff comes from my DNA. It's built in me. And that can make, it can really, it's an incredible, to watch. I watch some of these shows, and I see the people react emotionally, and it's moving, because it really, it's in a bizarre way, it provides it's a weird biological sense of purpose, that where we came from is still resonating in our genes, and the genes express themselves in how we look, how we act, how we think, how we feel, how we are as human beings. So anyway, this is a little bit more of a thoughtful episode, and I'll do more of these. I keep promising to do more of a lot of stuff, but I will do more of these, because I really felt moved once I realized what was around my neck to do something like this, and to try to relate it to your life, not just my life, but to show you how that can relate to your life. So if you like that sort of thing, subscribe to Thoughts Elite, and share this stuff with your friends, so that they can also, maybe dig into their past, and learn a little bit more about who they